Hello and welcome, it's Chris from Christopher Hall Training. Welcome to this tutorial where we're going to be talking about a simple exercise or exercises that you can start doing to help your scoliosis. This has come about from previous videos where I've got a lot of questions about what can I start doing, what exercise have you got a program, and when it comes to scoliosis it's quite hard to put a program together because I don't quite know what your scoliosis is like. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to look at some anatomy first, just to get a basic understanding of why I'm teaching what I'm teaching. And then we're going to go through let's just say, there's 4 parts to this exercise. It's not an exercise in a traditional sense because some of the principles of posture are slightly different to what many people think they might be or what they should be. It's not necessarily exercise like planks and side planks and things like that. They have their uses, but it's very much, it's you being in the best posture that you can be in, and then over time that starts to get better and better and better. So what we're going to do is we're going to explain that as we go through. If you've watched a previous video of mine about scoliosis, you would have seen that what happens is we break the body up into these blocks. So you've got a block for the pelvis, you've got a block for the lumbar spine or the lower back, and then the mid back, and then the upper back. So there are these 4 blocks. Now what we need to do is we need to line these 4 blocks up. So they need to be sort of sat on top of each other like 4 bricks would sit on top of each other. But what's happened in scoliosis is they've become sort of sort of twisted forward or twisted around, and then they're sort of all out of alignment all the way up the spine. So what we need to be able to do is we need to line these sort of rectangular blocks up from bottom to top. So what we're going to focus on in this tutorial is that bottom block, which is the hips. So there's 4 things that we need to do for it, which we'll talk about in a second. But the muscles that we're talking about, there are basically 3 major ones of the hip: glute max, glute medius, glute minimus. We can include psoas into it to some regard, but that's more so for the lumbar spine and potentially the thoracic and sort of middle part of the back. But the main 3 muscles that we're going to be focusing on at the moment are the hip muscles. So the glute max, glute medius, glute minimus. What we've also got is what the hip and the thigh can do. So the hip goes into extension. It also goes into external rotation and internal rotation. So it's very much about you guys looking at your body and what it's doing. So we're going to be focusing on standing up straight. What we've then got to do is we've then got to create this correct position. Now for different people it's going to mean doing different things, because some people might be sort of rotated from the right side around to the left, or some people might be from the left side round to the right. So everyone's going to have their individual aspects of it, but the principles that I'm talking about are going to be universal between them all. Because now that we understand that the hip extends, externally rotates and internally rotates, so what we then have to do is we then have to create that correct position out of where it potentially already is. So it's very much thinking about, well, if your hips are tilted one way and rotated, we then need to bring that back out. We need to rotate it back that way and tilt it that way, which will then help your body come upright, if that makes sense. So the muscles that we're talking about: glute max, glute medius, glute minimus, and then we're going to be talking about hip extension, external rotation and internal rotation. As I mentioned before, there are sort of 4 exercises or 4 movements or 4 positions that we're going to be focusing on in this tutorial. We're going to be looking at different planes of movement, so different positions that the body can go in. Now this doesn't mean that you're going to be in all 4 of them. It might be that you're in 2, it might be that you're in 3, or it might even be that you're in 4 of them. So you need to work on all 4 of them. But that's for you to figure out. As I mentioned, these principles that I'm talking about are going to be universal, and then you can apply the ones that you need, be it 2, 3, or 4 of them. So what's going to happen is the first movement, postural position that we need to go in is, first of all, it's the weight shift. So you might find that you've got this curve sort of going down the front of your body like that. So what you need to do is bring that back into alignment so you're stood up nice and straight. Now you might find that your spine's sort of slightly twisted like this. That's fine for now because we aren't focusing on this bit. What we want to do is we want to focus on correcting this bottom block. And then in future tutorials, we're going to look at blocks further up. But first of all, if we're like that, and we've got that curve, we bring that one back. So that's sort of movement or posture number one. Another thing you can do for this is if you've got a broom or some sort of stick, you can use this to anchor yourself into the floor. So it's just a bit easier to try and put all of these different movements together. So if you find yourself like that, you can just use your hands on there and just bring yourself back into that position. So you're up nice and tall. So that's number one. Number two is still in what's called the sagittal plane. So the sagittal plane is where I move backwards and forwards. So if I'm walking, my arms are moving in the sagittal plane, they're moving backwards and forwards, and so would my legs be if I were walking. So we've done that with the whole body. We've moved that backwards in that sagittal plane. What we've then got is the position of the pelvis. So the pelvis can tilt. So what we've got to imagine is our pelvis is a bowl of water. What you might find is that the pelvis is tilting forwards and therefore the water would be pouring out the front. So what we then need to do is bring that back up level. So we've done the first one, we've brought ourselves back, but we've still got this anterior pelvic tilt here. So we then engage the abdominals, we engage the glutes, and that then brings our pelvis nice and level. So not only have we got a pelvis level, we're starting to stand straight from hips downward. It might be still a little bit twisted up top, but that's absolutely fine for now. So that's number one, is coming back into the standing up straight. Number two is getting that anterior pelvic tilt and getting the pelvis level. So those are the first two. Then we've got number three. Now number three is what's called in the frontal plane, which is a sideways. So it's movements this way or that. So we've done forwards and back. We're now going to do left to right. So again, we can use this. So we're standing up straight, we've got the abdominals engaged, the glutes are engaged, and that's holding our pelvis in that neutral position from front to back. What we've then got to think about is, are we weight shifting to that side? So again, it's bringing it back and keeping the pelvis nice and level and holding it in that position. Now again, we might be a little bit skew-if from the spine up, but again, that's absolutely fine for now. What we're focusing on is lining up this bottom rectangle or bottom brick or bottom block. So we're getting that in position. And then number four is transverse. So it's where we rotate. So we might be sort of in this position. So if we look at scoliosis as a whole, I've got an anterior pelvic tilt, I'm shifted to the left, and I'm rotated to the left as well. So what we need to do is bring ourselves back out of that, which is what we've started doing. So we've brought ourselves back, we've brought ourselves into position, we've leveled ourselves up, now we need to come out of that rotation. So again, we can use this as an anchor. So if we are across like that, and it's then coming back into that position. Now, you may not work through these in a linear process like I've just done, but if we look at them as single things, you can then get an understanding of the movement. So it's understanding the position or the posture of your pelvis. So if you are anteriorly pelvic tilted, sort of shifted forward and rotated and leaning to the left, then all that's going to happen is you're going to then create that sort of position further up. But if we can then come out of that and we can sort of unrotate, anterior pelvic tilt, and then keep the weight shift, we can then start to, in a sense, have a neutral, natural, straight posture through the lower body. Once we've got the bottom block, it then allows us to understand what's happening above. If we work from the top down, it's going to be a very difficult or a slightly more difficult job to be able to unwind all of that. But if we can go from the foundation, and it then highlights what's happening further up, and we can work on each block at a time. So if you can now take that away, you can then start just using exactly as I've done, just thinking about what's going on in your body, anchoring yourself if you need it, and then just coming out of any swaying. So again, we're coming upright, we're coming out of any anterior pelvic tilt, making that level, we're coming out of any frontal weight shift to either the left or the right, and then we're coming out of any rotation that might be happening into that position. So to summarize what I've said, essentially what we're trying to do is unwind the scoliosis and stand up straight. That's all we're trying to focus on. So if I could summarize it in any way, it's just learning to stand up straight. Now obviously that's easier said than done, but as the essence of what I'm saying, that's what we're working towards. It's just there's a slightly specific and an individualized way that you're doing it at the moment. So there's going to be a specific and individualized way that you need to come out of that and then come up. But those are the four sort of, I guess, principles that you need to focus on, which is number one, the weight shift forwards and back. You've then got the pelvic tilt, and then you've got weight shift to the left or weight shift to the right that you need to correct. And then finally, if there's any rotation there, you need to unrotate as well. So there's those four principles. You don't necessarily have to work on 1, 2, 3 and then 4. It could be 2, 1, 3 and 4, or 4, 2, 3 and 1, whichever it is for you, but you need to figure that out using those four principles. So hopefully that's been helpful. My name is Chris from Chris Frontal Training. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.